The night Amanda Knox entered prison, Florence was quiet in a way that felt deliberate, like the city itself was holding its breath. The sirens had stopped. The cameras were gone. But something far worse awaited behind the stone walls she was about to cross. Her name still meant something then. An American student. A smiling face on social media. A girl who had come to Italy chasing language, freedom, and a future that felt limitless. By dawn, she would become a number. The gates of Kaplan prison opened without ceremony. No dramatic clang. No warning. Just a slow, grinding sound, metal dragging against destiny. The guards didn't look at her face. They looked at paperwork. To them, guilt was already inked onto the page. Amanda's wrists were cold where the cuffs had been. Her body moved forward, but her mind lagged behind, still stuck in the interrogation room where sleep deprivation, shouting, and fear had bent reality into something unrecognizable. She had signed papers she didn't understand. Spoken words she didn't remember saying. Somewhere in the chaos, truth had stopped mattering. Inside the prison, the air was damp and heavy, as if the walls themselves were sweating secrets. The corridors were narrow, designed to shrink a person, to remind them how little space they were allowed to occupy in the world now. Every door she passed slammed shut behind her, not loudly, but firmly. Final. This was not the prison of movies. There were no dramatic screams echoing endlessly. There was something worse, routine. Silence. The sense that time had thickened into something you had to push through with every breath. Her cell was small. Concrete walls. A metal bed bolted to the floor. A thin mattress that smelled faintly of bleach and old fear. A toilet without privacy. A window too high to see the sky properly. Just a slice of light that reminded you freedom still existed somewhere else. The door closed. And with it, Amanda Knox disappeared. In prison, names are dangerous. Names carry stories, and stories attract attention. Attention brings judgment. Judgment brings consequences. Within days, whispers began to spread. Guards talked. Inmates listened. Newspapers screamed headlines in bold black letters she could not escape. Murderer. Liar. Ice Queen. The media had already decided who she was. Prison simply enforced the verdict. The other women watched her closely at first. Some with curiosity. Some with contempt. Some with something colder, calculation. Prison has its own ecosystem, and a foreigner accused of murder is an unpredictable variable. She didn't belong to any group. She didn't speak the language well enough to defend herself. That made her vulnerable. At night, the prison changed. The daylight routines, roll call, bland food, forced walks, gave way to something more psychological. Doors locked. Lights dimmed. Sounds traveled through walls like ghosts. Crying. Shouting. Laughter that cut too sharply to be kind. Amanda lay awake, replaying every moment of the investigation like a broken film reel. The interrogation room. The bright lights. The voices telling her she was wrong about her own memories. Telling her they knew she was there. That she was lying. That the only way out was to cooperate. Sleep deprivation does strange things to the mind. It loosens reality. It plants doubt. In prison, that doubt grows teeth. She began to question herself. What if I did something and don't remember? What if they're right? What if I deserve to be here? Prison doesn't need to torture you physically when it can let your thoughts do the work. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. Amanda learned the rules quickly. Don't stare. Don't ask too many questions. Don't cry where others can see you. Emotion was currency, and she had none to spare. Letters from home arrived late, sometimes already opened. Words from her parents felt unreal, like messages from another lifetime. She read them over and over, until the paper softened at the folds. Proof that she had once been loved outside these walls. But prison has a way of erasing the past. The guards treated her with formal distance. Not cruel, not kind. Just indifferent. Indifference is powerful. It tells you that your suffering is ordinary, unremarkable, expected. When you ask for help, it echoes back as inconvenience. Every walk through the corridor reinforced the same truth. This place was designed to outlast hope. The worst moments came unexpectedly. A shouted insult in Italian she only half understood. A newspaper photo slipped across a table by another inmate, smiling cruelly. Headlines screaming guilt as fact. She was being tried twice, once in court, and once every single day in the court of public opinion. Amanda started keeping her mind busy to survive. She translated conversations in her head, repeated song lyrics silently, counted steps, counted breaths, counted cracks in the wall, anything to anchor herself to the idea that time was still moving forward. But prison time doesn't move forward. It sinks. And as Amanda Knox sat alone on her metal bed, staring at a wall that offered no answers, one truth began to settle in, a truth far more terrifying than bars or locks. In this place, innocence did not protect you. And the longer she stayed, the more the prison worked its quiet magic, reshaping her, hollowing her, preparing her for a future that might never come. Because beyond these walls, the world was already celebrating her downfall. And inside them, Amanda was learning the most brutal lesson of all. Sometimes, prison doesn't wait for a verdict. It decides who you are the moment the door closes. The days blurred into one another until Amanda could no longer tell whether it was Monday or Thursday, winter or spring. Time inside the prison did not flow forward. It pulled. It stagnated. It sat heavy in the lungs like damp air, making every breath feel borrowed. She stopped marking the calendar. There was no point. Instead, she measured life in smaller units. The sound of keys in the morning, the echo of footsteps at night, the rare moments when a guard said her name instead of her number. Those moments mattered more than dates ever could. The prison began to change her in ways she did not notice at first. Her posture shifted, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes trained downward. She walked closer to walls, instinctively minimizing her presence. Freedom had once been her natural state. Now it felt like a rumor. Every so often, a new inmate arrived. Fresh fear. Fresh confusion. Amanda recognized the look immediately. She wanted to warn them, to explain how quickly the place would get inside their head. But she stayed silent. Survival had taught her that empathy was dangerous currency. The worst nights were after court appearances. She would return to her cell with the echo of the courtroom still ringing in her ears, lawyers arguing over her life as if she were an object on a table, experts dissecting her behavior, prosecutors presenting theories that felt like fiction written with confidence. They spoke about her, never to her. Back in her cell, she lay awake replaying every word, every glance from the jury, every note scribbled by the judge. The uncertainty was a slow poison. A verdict could end the suffering, one way or another. But waiting was endless. Some inmates believed prison broke people suddenly, dramatically. Amanda learned the truth. It worked slowly, patiently, like erosion. You didn't shatter. You wore down. She missed ordinary pain. A headache. A cold. Things that could be treated and resolved. Prison pain had no cure. It lived in the mind and fed on isolation. There were moments when she imagined freedom so vividly it hurt. Walking without escort. Sleeping in darkness. Hearing silence that wasn't enforced. Those fantasies became dangerous too. Hope, unmanaged, could destroy you faster than despair. So she disciplined herself not to think too far ahead. Just make it through today. Just make it to lights out. Just breathe. The prison staff watched her closely. Some with suspicion. Others with curiosity. She was infamous now. A name that drew attention even behind walls meant to hide people from the world. She could feel it in the way conversations stopped when she entered a room. Fame in prison is a liability. One afternoon, she overheard guards discussing her case in hushed tones. They spoke casually, confidently, as if the outcome was already decided. Their certainty frightened her more than anger ever could. Certainty left no room for truth. When the guilty verdict came, the prison absorbed it without reaction. No announcement. No ceremony. Just paperwork. Just another entry in a system designed to continue regardless of individual tragedy. Amanda felt strangely hollow. She had prepared herself for devastation, for collapse. Instead, there was numbness. A quiet realization that the worst thing had already happened long before the verdict was spoken. She had lost control of her own narrative. The sentence stretched ahead of her like a tunnel with no visible end. Years. Decades. A life reduced to routines and regulations. For the first time, the thought crossed her mind, not of guilt, but of permanence. What if this was it? That night, she sat on her bed and stared at the wall until her vision blurred. The concrete seemed closer than ever, pressing inward. Prison had done its job well. It had made the unimaginable feel possible. But something else stirred beneath the fear. Defiance. Not loud. Not dramatic. Quiet and stubborn. Amanda decided she would remember everything. Every injustice. Every contradiction. Every lie dressed up as certainty. Memory became resistance. As long as she remembered who she was before the cell, the prison had not fully won. Appeals came slowly. Painfully. Each one raised hope only to threaten it again. Legal language filtered into her daily thoughts, procedures, reviews, errors. Her life had become a case file moving through an indifferent system. Years passed. Her body adjusted to confinement, but her mind refused to settle. She read obsessively, learned Italian fluently, studied the people around her. Prison became her forced education in human psychology, how fear manifested differently in everyone, how power corrupted even minor authority, how survival took countless forms. Then, without warning, everything shifted. A ruling. A reversal. A whisper of doubt creeping into the certainty that had once surrounded her guilt. The prison buzzed with rumors. Guards acted differently. Lawyers spoke with cautious optimism. Hope returned, not as a fantasy, but as a fragile possibility. Amanda was afraid of it. She had learned what hope could do when it was taken away. When the day finally came, the day the door opened not for count, not for escort, but for release, she felt nothing at first. No joy. No relief. Just disbelief. Freedom did not feel real. She stepped outside into sunlight that felt too bright, too vast. The world had continued without her, unaware of the years she had lost inside concrete walls. Cameras waited. Questions waited. Judgment waited. Prison had let her go, but it had not released her. The walls followed her into the open air, invisible but heavy. Every sound felt sharp. Every choice overwhelming. Freedom, she realized, required muscles prison had allowed to atrophy. Amanda Knox walked out carrying more than memories. She carried the knowledge of how easily a life could be dismantled. How thin the line was between innocence and condemnation. How quickly society could decide who deserved to be caged. The prison had taken years she would never get back, but it had failed to take the one thing it wanted most. Her voice. And long after the cell door closed behind her for the final time, the echo of that prison remained, not as a symbol of defeat, but as a warning. Because some prisons are built of stone, and others are built from certainty, fear, and the human hunger to believe the worst. Freedom was supposed to feel like release. Instead, it felt like exposure. Outside the prison gates, there were no walls to lean against, no routines to hide inside. The sky felt too wide, the noise too loud, the stairs too sharp. Every step Amanda took felt watched, measured, interpreted. Prison had trained her for confinement, not for a world that demanded explanations. The cameras came first. Lenses pressed forward like weapons, questions fired without pause. They wanted sound bites, emotion, confession, denial, anything that could be packaged neatly. Amanda stood there blinking in the sunlight, realizing that the cell had only changed shape. The bars were gone, but the judgment remained. Inside prison, she had learned how to be invisible. Outside, invisibility was impossible. At night, she slept poorly. Silence unsettled her. She woke expecting keys, counts, shouted orders. Her body reacted before her mind could catch up, heart racing, muscles tense, ready for rules that no longer applied. The prison had rewired her instincts. Simple choices overwhelmed her. What to eat, where to walk, when to speak. Freedom came with decisions, and decisions carried risk. In prison, everything had been decided for her. Now, responsibility returned all at once, heavy and unfamiliar. People talked to her carefully, like she might break. Others didn't bother with care at all. Online, strangers debated her guilt with confidence that felt surreal. They analyzed old footage, old photos, old expressions, as if time had frozen her at her worst moment. To them, she wasn't a person. She was a theory, a symbol, a story they could argue about from the safety of distance. Amanda learned something chilling. Being released does not mean being believed. The legal system moved again, slow and grinding, like the prison doors she still heard in her dreams. Appeals, reviews, reversals. Each ruling reopened wounds she had barely managed to close. Every time hope rose, fear followed close behind. What if they took it all back? She lived in a state of suspended reality, free, but not finished. Innocent in some courts, guilty in others. Her life existed between footnotes and headlines, between law and opinion. The prison had taught her patience. The outside world tested it relentlessly. She tried to speak once, to explain the pressure, the interrogations, the way truth had been bent until it snapped. Some listened. Many didn't. Confessions, people believed, were simple things. They didn't want to understand how the mind breaks when authority insists on a lie. Amanda realized then that prison hadn't been the only place that refused nuance. Justice, she learned, was not a clean line. It was a battlefield littered with assumptions. Years later, when the final ruling came, when the highest court declared what she had always known, the moment felt strangely quiet. No dramatic music. No sudden peace. Just a legal acknowledgement that arrived too late to undo the damage. She was acquitted. Officially. Completely. Permanently. The word felt fragile. There was no ceremony for lost time. No apology that could give back birthdays, youth, years spent counting cracks in a concrete wall. The system corrected itself on paper, then moved on. Amanda didn't. She carried prison with her into classrooms, interviews, relationships. She flinched at raised voices. She studied people's expressions too closely. She prepared for punishment even when none was coming. But slowly, painfully, something shifted. She began to reclaim her story. Not the version shaped by headlines. Not the caricature frozen in public imagination. Her own. Complex. Messy. Human. She spoke about coercion, about psychological pressure, about how easily certainty could be manufactured. She spoke not to convince everyone, but to reach those who were listening. Because prison had shown her something most people never see. The justice system does not need monsters. It only needs mistakes, and the refusal to admit them. Amanda Knox survived a prison built of stone and steel. But she also survived a prison built of belief. And that second one, the one made of certainty, fear, and spectacle, was far harder to escape. Some nights, even now, she still dreams of keys and corridors. But she wakes up free. Scarred, yes, but awake. Aware. Unbroken in the one way that mattered most. Because the prison tried to erase her. Instead, it taught her the value of memory, voice, and resistance. And in a world quick to judge and slow to doubt itself, that may be the most dangerous freedom of all. Time did not heal the prison. It only taught Amanda how to carry it. Years passed, but the imprint remained, etched deep beneath the surface, invisible to anyone who hadn't lived inside locked doors and unanswered questions. On the outside, people expected recovery to be linear. They expected gratitude, smiles, closure. They did not understand that survival does not end when the gate opens. The prison had trained her nervous system to expect danger in stillness. A sudden knock on a door sent a shock through her chest. Authority figures, police, officials, even bureaucrats, triggered an instinctive tightening in her throat. Her body remembered before her mind could intervene. Freedom demanded a new kind of discipline. She learned to sit with silence without fearing it, to sleep in darkness without panic, to remind herself, again and again, that no one was coming to count her at dawn. These were small victories, invisible ones, but they mattered more than public declarations ever could. Yet the world was not finished with her. Every new article reopened the case like a wound that refused to scar over. Each retelling flattened her into a headline, stripped of complexity. Some stories called her a victim. Others called her lucky. Few acknowledged the reality that she had lived through something that left no clean narrative behind. Amanda learned that innocence did not grant immunity from suspicion. There were moments she considered disappearing, changing her name, withdrawing completely, letting the world replace her with its own version of events. But prison had already taken enough from her. Silence, she decided, would be another sentence. So she spoke. Not with anger. Not with vengeance. With precision. She spoke about interrogation tactics that preyed on confusion and exhaustion. About how authority can manufacture truth when it refuses to accept uncertainty. About how prisons do not require guilt to function, only bodies. Her voice unsettled people. Because it forced a question many preferred not to ask. What if this could happen to anyone? Some listened. Others resisted. Systems protect themselves. Admitting error threatens the foundation they stand on. Amanda understood this now in a way theory could never teach. Prison had been her education in power. She met others like her, People who had been swallowed by processes too large to care about individual truth. Their stories differed, but the patterns were familiar. Rushed conclusions, overconfidence, public pressure, the need for closure outweighing the need for accuracy. The prison had not been an anomaly. It had been a symptom. In quiet moments, Amanda still returned to that cell in her mind, the cold metal bed, the high window, the way the air felt heavier at night. She remembered the version of herself who lay there wondering if she would ever be believed again. She wished she could tell that girl something important, that survival does not always look like victory. Sometimes it looks like endurance. Sometimes it looks like refusing to disappear. The world never fully let her go. But she stopped asking it to. She built a life piece by piece, careful not to rush what had been broken slowly. Trust, identity, safety. These were not things prison allowed you to practice. They had to be learned again, deliberately. And through it all, one truth remained unshaken. Prison had failed to define her. It had tried, through isolation, through certainty, through the grinding weight of time, but it had underestimated something essential. It had mistaken compliance for surrender, silence for erasure. Amanda Knox had walked through a system that mistook confidence for truth and spectacle for justice. She emerged not untouched, but intact, a witness. And her story remained, not as entertainment, not as controversy, but as a warning etched into human memory, that the most dangerous prisons are not always built with walls. Some are built with assumptions. And once they close around someone, they are very hard to escape, unless you survive long enough to speak. There is a moment, long after survival, when the mind stops asking why and starts asking what now. Amanda reached that moment quietly. No announcement. No revelation. Just the slow understanding that the past would never loosen its grip unless she learned how to live alongside it. The prison had taught her to observe herself from a distance, to monitor tone, posture, expression. Outside, that habit lingered. She watched her own reactions like a guard watches a cell, alert, cautious, ready to intervene. Joy felt suspicious. Calm felt temporary. Trust felt like a risk assessment. Yet life continued to insist on itself. Seasons changed. New conversations replaced old ones. People entered her life without knowing her story first, and that anonymity felt strange, almost dangerous. For years, she had been known before she was met. Now, sometimes, she could simply be present. But prison had sharpened her awareness of how fragile that normalcy was. She noticed how easily others accepted official narratives, how quickly certainty formed when fear demanded answers. She recognized the same patterns she had lived under, replayed in other cases, other headlines. Each one tightened something in her chest, because she knew how it ended when doubt was treated as weakness. Amanda no longer believed in simple villains. Prison had cured her of that illusion. She had seen cruelty born not from hatred, but from procedure, from people doing their jobs without asking whether those jobs were just. That understanding isolated her in new ways. It is difficult to rejoin a world when you see its machinery too clearly. Still, she chose to engage. Carefully. Deliberately. She wrote. She spoke. She explained, not to relive the trauma, but to prevent its repetition. Her words were not accusations. They were records. Evidence of what happens when systems confuse confidence with correctness. She understood now that justice is not a destination. It is a process that requires humility to function. The moment it stops questioning itself, it becomes indistinguishable from punishment. Prison had tried to convince her that she was powerless. Survival proved otherwise. The nights grew quieter over time. The dreams came less often. When they did, she learned not to fight them. Resistance gave them strength. Acceptance loosened their hold. She woke, breathed, reminded herself where she was. Free. Not untouched. Never untouched. But free in the ways that mattered. There were still people who refused to believe her. There always would be. Amanda accepted that truth with a clarity prison had forced upon her. Innocence does not require consensus. Truth does not depend on popularity. Her life no longer revolved around proving anything. It revolved around meaning. She found it in small acts, listening, learning, choosing compassion without naivety. Prison had shown her the cost of indifference. She refused to pay it forward. And when she looked back now, at the gates that had once swallowed her whole, she no longer felt only anger or grief. She felt resolve. because her story was no longer about confinement. It was about what remains after confinement fails. The prison had taken years, certainty, and illusions, but it had also revealed something unbreakable beneath fear, a self that could endure silence, survive judgment, and still insist on humanity. Amanda Knox had walked through a system that tried to simplify her into a verdict. She emerged complex, conscious, awake, and that, in a world hungry for easy answers, was its own kind of freedom. Have you ever wondered what happens after the headlines fade? After the cameras leave and a person, once a global spectacle, is left alone to pick up the pieces? This is the story of Amanda Knox, not of the trial that defined her, but of the life she painstakingly rebuilt afterward. There was no grand moment of closure for Amanda. No final slam of a door on the past. Prison had taught her that endings are rarely so dramatic. They arrive quietly, disguised as just another Tuesday. One morning, she woke up and realized something profound. For the first time in years, she had gone hours without thinking about her cell. It wasn't an act of defiance or a conscious effort. The prison, with its cold concrete and clanging keys, had simply loosened its grip. And in that quiet realization, she understood a fundamental truth about survival. It wasn't about forgetting, it was about reclaiming her attention. For so long, her mind had been a fortress, constantly defending against accusations, against traumatic memories, against fear. Now, slowly, tentatively, she allowed herself to look outward again, to make plans without mapping out every worst-case scenario, to imagine a future that wasn't on the verge of collapse. Of course, the world didn't just forget. The echoes of judgment remained, whispers in the digital ether. But Amanda learned that echoes only have power if you turn to face them, if you let them occupy your present. She chose not to. She chose, instead, to live with intention, to love carefully, but with an open and honest heart. She chose to speak up when her silence could allow harm to others, but also to step back when the noise threatened to turn her back into a symbol, a caricature of a person. The system had tried to reduce her to a cautionary tale, a lesson to be learned. But Amanda Knox refused to be reduced. She was not a lesson, she was a human being. When people asked her what prison was like, she began to answer differently. She stopped describing the physical walls and the monotonous routines. Instead, she spoke of the gnawing uncertainty. She talked about how fragile truth becomes when those in power stop listening, how easily fear rushes in to fill the space left by doubt. She spoke because silence had already cost her years of her life. And she spoke because she knew, with a certainty forged in fire, that somewhere another person was sitting in a cell, staring at a wall, wondering if anyone would ever believe them. That person's struggle mattered more to her than her own comfort. Amanda Knox did not emerge from prison victorious, not in the triumphant way stories usually demand. There was no clean win, no redemption arc neat enough for a movie poster. Her triumph was not untouched by immense loss. What emerged was something quieter, but infinitely stronger, a profound awareness. She now understood that justice is not a guarantee, that innocence is not infallible armor. She saw how systems, built by humans, inherit all of our flaws, our ego, our misplaced certainty, our impatience. But she also knew something else, something vital. The prison had failed in its ultimate task. It had not erased her humanity. She could still feel compassion without sacrificing her judgment. She could question authority without becoming a cynic. And most importantly, she could live her life without asking for permission from the past. Those iron gates that once defined her entire world became just that, a memory. A heavy, permanent part of her story, but no longer its center. The prison belonged to a chapter she had survived, not a future she was indebted to. And so, the real story of Amanda Knox doesn't end with a verdict. It doesn't conclude in a courtroom. It ends, and begins again, every single day, with a choice. The choice of a woman who walked out of a place designed to silence her and refused to disappear. A woman with a voice shaped by confinement but never owned by it. A woman who rebuilt her life not on the shaky ground of denial, but on the bedrock of a hard-earned, deeply personal truth. Because some prisons are designed to teach you how small the world can become. But others, if you survive them, teach you something far more powerful. They teach you just how wide the world still is, waiting for you, once you find the courage to step beyond the walls. Amanda Knox stepped forward, and the prison, at last, was left behind. Thank you for watching. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing for more content that looks beyond the headlines.